All right, my friends, welcome back to Anti-War Radio on Chaos 92.7 FM in Austin, Texas. Streaming live worldwide on the internet, chaosradioaustin.org and antiwar.com/radio. Introducing our guest today, it's the great libertarian journalist James Bovard. He's the author of The Fair Trade Fraud and the Farm Fiasco, Lost Rights, Feeling Your Pain, Terrorism and Tyranny, The Bush Betrayal, Attention Deficit Democracy, and at least a handful that I left off the list there. Welcome back to the show, Jim.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, well, I'm really glad to have you here, and I know that you've reported on FISA over the years and written about it in your books and all that kind of thing, and I think before the Protect America Act or the recent controversy about the telecom immunity and all that kind of thing, help me understand correctly, you already had a problem with the FISA statute as is in 78 as somehow violating the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, is that right?
Well, FISA uses a much lower standard to justify a search warrant than what the Fourth Amendment requires. And there were some twists and turns that the Congress did in the Carter administration back in 1978 to put that law into place. So it's, there are real doubts about the law itself. But the thing that's fascinating is that in the last few years, it's been obvious that the Bush people have trampled this law up and down. They've trampled the Constitution's prohibition on warrantless searches and wiretaps, and yet you have almost the entire political establishment on both parties cheering this on, acting like it's no big deal, and acting like, telephone companies and others which violated the law should receive a pass simply because they were doing their duty because some government agent asked them to violate our rights.
Well, that's what a duty is, right? Something that a government agent asks you to do?
Well, that's a good definition. That's pretty close to what Senator Kit Bond used. He said, well, I think people understand if the government asks you to do something, you should do it. And it's kind of like, I guess he wasn't around in 1946 for the Nuremberg trials.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. I think we all learn, even as little kids in this country, that just following orders isn't good enough. I mean, that's part of the basic story of us as good guys in World War II.
Well, yeah, that's part of the story. Yeah, there's some doubts about the story, but that's a different show. The thing that's fascinating to me, and I want to say it's great that antiwar.com has been so hardline and valiant on this FISA issue. And the same with a handful of liberal groups like Glenn Greenwald's folks, Fire Dog Lake, Blue America. Those folks have got a full-page ad in today's Washington Post. It starts out on July 4th, America celebrated the rule of law. On July 9th, the Senate will vote to bury it. And it's really great that these folks are attacking head-on the total betrayal of the Constitution and everything else that's going on in Washington.
It's funny that there's all this controversy about immunity for the telecoms, but nobody even mentions immunity for the government agent who told them, hey, the president wants you to do this. What about that guy? He just gets immunity and nobody even thinks otherwise for a moment.
Yeah, I mean...
They don't have to pass a new law to grant it to him, whoever he is.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing that happened with the Military Commissions Act. People kind of, pretend not to notice that it's also giving immunity to the top policymakers, people who knowingly conspired to violate the law and the Constitution. I mean, it is an outrage that people like Cheney and David Addington are not facing charges for this, so-called terrorist surveillance program. And yet almost nobody in D.C. has got the balls to go after this. People like Ron Paul do. Senator Feingold of Wisconsin does, Dodd does, but this is so much worse than what Richard Nixon did, and there seems to be so much less courage than there was back in Nixon's time.
Is it so much worse than what Nixon did? What did Nixon do, and how's this worse?
Okay, the thing that Nixon did was a handful of targeted wiretaps on individuals that he thought would be, were threats to national security. I'm talking about the wiretap charge in his impeachment articles. But what this terrorist surveillance program does is basically let the government wiretap whoever it pleases, and they don't even need a warrant. And with the Protect America Act that they passed last August, the government has a blank check to do wiretaps on any international phone call that an American is making, or any international email. There is no need for a warrant. It's like that the government's entitled. Say, for instance, someone there in Austin is calling somebody in Mexico City. Well, that's all they need. That's all they need to tap the call.
And so, is there any difference? I know the Protect America Act was allowed to expire back in February, but now they have these new amendments to FISA. Is it basically just the Protect America Act again? Is there any difference? Do you know?
I think that there's been some worse stuff added. I haven't gone through line by line looking at, but it's just there's such a total disregard by the members of Congress as far as their oath of office and everything else. And I had hoped that there would be a much bigger backlash by the American people on this. But for some reason, it's almost as if this FISA program is some kind of hellishly complex cotton subsidy program that no one wants to pay attention to. But it's a real bellwether for people just kind of shrugging their shoulders when the government torches the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, that's a good point, the farm subsidy thing. I think a lot of people, when they hear people complain about central banking or what have you, they just say, forget it. That's something that's too complex. They don't want to take the time to want to learn about it, so it goes on the somebody else's business category in their head, and they go on about their life. But this FISA thing is, the Fourth Amendment isn't that long, and it's pretty clear what's going on here. It's not okay to go around tapping people's phones unless an independent judge says it's okay based on probable cause, a sworn affidavit. That's the rules, period, right?
Yeah, that was what the Founding Fathers intended. I mean, the Founding Fathers, part of the reason that we kicked the British out was that their boundless searches of people's homes, papers, letters, stuff like that. And here we are. It's so funny to see, like the wizards of the Washington Post editorial page have been gung-ho in favor of this latest FISA bill, which they label compromise, which is BS. But it's just funny that you got all these liberals telling us that we should trust the government even after the government admitted that it's breaking the law and violating the Constitution. This is a sign of how far we've fallen, and the fact that so few conservatives give a damn about this. I'm starting to doubt whether they were sincere back in the Clinton years when they said they were upset about Clinton violating freedom.
Right, yeah. Well, I guess it just depends on the face that's taking it away from them. I was actually kind of shocked, not that I really would have expected any better at this point, but when the story came out at the end of 2005 there, that they'd been doing this, I guess James Rise in the New York Times, they withheld the story forever, and they finally revealed that Bush had been tapping everybody's phone without a warrant or whoever he felt like, and he gave a press conference the next day, Jim, where he just said, yeah, what? And everybody said, well, I guess nothing. And that was just the end of that. But he was basically confessing to committing multiple felonies. I mean, the FISA statute is a felony statute. It says you have to do this or you go to jail if you try to go around this method of doing this.
Well, and it's very clear in FISA that there's that warrantless wiretaps, that there's no justification for them, that there is no national security pretext that the president can get around the Fourth Amendment. I mean, that was why FISA was enacted, because the Bush team, because the Nixon team and LBJ before him and others would do these warrantless wiretaps and claim that they had some kind of magic power as president to do that. Well, FISA said no, and yet it's a fascinating study in the lack of courage and balls of the entire political establishment and the media establishment as well. I don't recall Tim Russert being outraged by this. But
he was never outraged by much, I don't think. Unless you were standing up to the state, maybe that can tend to get him going.
Well, he seemed to be kind of rather outraged by Ron Paul, but I guess that's a special case.
Yeah. He's especially deserving of contempt, that Paul, of course.
There you go. But it's just, it's fascinating. It's hard to think of a better battle line to fight for freedom on than where the government has already admitted it violated the law and is ongoing violating the law and privacy and trampling the Constitution. I mean, this is the perfect invitation to take a stand. However, very few people have come to the barricades.
Well, there has been somewhat of a realignment. You mentioned with the Glenn Greenwald and Firedog Lake and all those guys coming together. They're coming together with Trevor Lyman and the guys who raised the money for the Ron Paul money bombs and doing this strange bedfellows thing. I guess that's the full-page ad in the Washington Post that you're referring to there. So that's kind of a broad coalition, and I mean, I guess it's few in number, but it's wide and varied in terms of membership as far as that goes. That's great. That's excellent. I was not aware that the Ron Paul money bomb wizards were involved with this, but that's great. Bob Barr is also excellent on this, and Barr's comments on this have gotten a fair amount of attention. So